Okay, so I'm going to show you how to make this variation on an Organix bead style. I first wrote an article about this technique back in 2006 in Glass Craftsman Magazine, and it's basically a technique to make these organic looking beads with spots of color that make them look sort of like natural gemstones. So in the demo, I'm going to show you this shape bead, which is using Zuzi's pillow, straight-sided pillow. And I have since made a collection of beads using the regular Zuzi's pillow press. It has a slimmer profile. I want to make a bracelet, so I'm using this because it's less chunky and is more comfortable to wear. In terms of glass and supplies, we're going to need a Hawaiian Sunset Frit. That's the color palette I'm showing here by Glass Diversions. Pretty much any Frit or Frit blend with transparent will work for this technique. The base glass is going to be a Fetre White, which is number 204. And for that webbing technique, we're going to be using a Fetre Intense Black, which is number 066. Okay, so I am going to start out by applying white glass to my mandrel. So what I'm doing is winding on enough glass to fill the bead cavity. I've judged the length of my footprint by just holding it temporarily in the bead cavity just to make sure I've got enough length down the mandrel. You want to go a little bit less than the width of the cavity. This is probably enough glass to actually work in the small cavity. So we'll try it. So the first step here is we're going to melt this in, and then we're going to touch on some of the black, intense black 066 stringer. And I like to do this little superheating stringer application trick. So what I'm doing is I'm getting the black really hot, and then I'm going to just barely touch it down on the bead. You can also touch it down on the mandrel to the side of the bead, and you're pulling out a stringer and just kind of winding it on crazily and melting it in. And the reason I touch down on the side of the bead is because I don't want to have a big blob of glass. The idea here is we're going to superheat this and have it all spread out. And so you don't want a great big blob because then it doesn't spread as much. You end up with a big blob in the end of the bead. So now that I have my black on, and it's just little wispies kind of randomly all over the bead, I'm going to heat the snot out of this. And it's going to cause the transparent to start to web and spread around. And the intense black does that on just about any base color. So you could do this on ivory, you could do this on any number of colored glass. The ivory does tend to react with some Frit blends, so you might want to test it out ahead of time. The white tends to be fairly neutral and non-reactive. So now I've got that the black webbed and spread out a little bit. Now I'm going to let my bead kind of firm up somewhat, and then I'm going to heat it up just enough to pick up some of my Frit. And I don't want to completely coat the bead with Frit, I just want a little bit here and there. I am using a stainless steel Japanese soup bowl, or soup spoon. And they're a great size if you have a small container Frit like I'm working from here. Get that out of the way a little bit. So I've got the outside of my bead hot, and I'm going to just kind of touch down in a few places and pick up some Frit. Again, I'm not trying to put a really thick layer. This is a number 1 size Frit, which is not a big chunk, but it's not a powder either. It's one of the smaller size ones. You could probably also use bigger size Frit. So now I am melting that in. So what's happening is the Frit is melting in. It's pushing kind of the webbing together and making little grid lines or, concentrated areas of the black Frit. Okay, and once I have my bead molten and the white just starts to turn back to opaque, I will be ready to press it in my press. Now, a lot of these presses, I don't want my sides to ooze too much, so I will touch down on one side and touch down on the other side, and that will take some of the heat out of it so it doesn't ooze quite as much. And then I will go ahead and press it in the cavity, and all that talking, it got too cold, so I'm going to try that again. I'm going to heat up the middle, touch it down, and then I'm going to go press it. There we go. All right, so you can tell by looking at the edges that I had a little bit too much glass for that cavity, but I didn't have enough for the other one. It's been a long time since I've used this press. We're not going to worry about it too much. What I'm going to do is gently heat up one side and let that softly kind of work its way back in. I don't want to force it in because then that'll change my coloration and make an obvious seam line there. Now I'm going to do the other side. I'm going to let that just kind of soften in on its own, and I'm using the end of a tool here to just kind of press it and flatten it out, and that kind of hides the seam. Now we need to go around the corner and do the same thing on the edges, so I'm going to aim my bead towards the torch and press both of those as well, get rid of that seam, and the same on the other side. This is kind of a trick I've figured out over the years. You can do it with virtually any shape press if you get a little bit too much ooze and you want to crisp it up a little bit. There we go. So I'm going to put a little bit of heat into the face of it. Some of the Frits, the colored Frits, need to strike to bring their color out. This one appears to be the same. So it was already cooling down nicely while it was in the press. So when you bring it back and introduce it to the flame, you want to just kind of kiss it a bit with the flame in the various parts, and that will bring a little bit more color intensity. And with pressed beads, before I go into the kiln, I generally do a twirl on either edge around the mandrel to make a nice bead hole. And there we go. I'm going to pop this puppy in the kiln. Thanks. Here are a few other examples of this frit technique. You can use different color transparent frits. This one is all fuchsia pink. This set here is done with orange, and these are Clemson colors. Funny story, I made a bracelet out of these for my brother. He was living in Germany at the time, and I get this message from him. The bracelet broke, the beads went all over the ground at an Oktoberfest beer garden, and he and a bunch of his friends were chasing the beads around in the gravel. Anyway, here are the ones I just demonstrated using the Glass Diversions Frit. This is the variation with ivory and homemade stringer from transparent amber glass. And that's the one that was in the Glass Craftsman article that I wrote up a number of years ago. And here's a similar variation to the pink ones. This is on a base of clear as opposed to opaque white. And there are a few spots of white on it, but it gives a subtly different look than the ones made on the opaque white. So be sure to check out my playlist on frit techniques. There are several videos already released, and there will be a few more coming up soon. One of them is a paintbrush technique. I think this is probably one of my favorites. Well, they're all really good. It's a technique I learned from Val Cox's Frit Secrets books. It's really good for focal beads, and you can make some smaller size beads fairly quickly, 3 per mandrel. I'll show you how to do that. I have a faux boro video out there, and there's a number of alternates that you can do. The green is one of them, but this makes really cool dragon scale beads. I have one on an ethereal raku powder technique is what I use to make these. They're pretty fun. And then I also have my nebula beads, and these make some really cool nebula looking thing using the iris reduction frits. And there's, again, some variations on a theme, and I have some tips on there, what I found works best and what doesn't work. Some of the new videos coming out are going to be how to pull flat stringers from Frits, and these are great for floral beads. And I'm also going to have a new one coming out soon about how to use chunks and pull that into stringer. Sometimes you can get like a number 5 Frit, which are chunks around this size, or sometimes you may get rod. Actually, in a rod, it's a big, 1-inch diameter cane, and you have to chop it up, and you can use that. So I'll have a video on that coming out soon too. So make sure you like and subscribe so you get notification of all the new stuff coming out. Thanks for watching. Bye.